We have a number of people on today, and a couple of them are new. I heard from Harry Joel of Eau Claire, who said he might be joining us today as well. And all of these folks are new, so I want to take just a bit of time and catch everybody up and give them an overview of what's been happening. Before I do that, though, can we go around and quickly introduce ourselves to each other, because some of us haven't seen each other before. I'm Sylvia Tiala. I'm one of the people who originated the community of practice along with Jesse Polzer. Jesse and I worked together the first part of the year, academic year in 2018, 2019, and we started looking at the research skill development framework, and we put this community of practice together. Jessie, around December, decided that she was going to move out Dustin's way, and she ended up taking a new job in Utah, so she's transitioning to a new job. In another couple of sessions, she's going to be back with us, so you'll see two of us then, and we'll just keep moving the community of practice forward. So I have a lot of experience with the RSD framework, and Jesse Polzer is our librarian who has a lot of experience with our framework for information literacy. With that, I will turn it over and let you folks introduce yourself to each other. But for those of you who haven't had the opportunity, you scroll to the bottom of your Zoom page, you'll see a microphone that says mute or start video. And if you can't see each other or you want to mute your microphone, you can click these buttons, and then you can either hide yourself and your microphone or come back online. So at any rate, Arity, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I will start. So my name is Arity Lowell. I'm at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, and my area of expertise is really physics, but I teach in a whole bunch of different, I teach in physics and math, and I also work in our education program and at the graduate level, and teach some philosophy of math and science classes. So I do a lot of different things, and a couple of years ago I went to a conference and saw Sylvia and Jesse do a really great presentation about the RSD, the Research Skills Framework, and I was really excited about it, and then they asked me to come and be a part of this, and I'm really excited to see how I can apply some of those pieces within my own teaching, specifically with physics. But also I want to take a look at how to scale all of that up and think about not just within a specific class, but within our program and within our department as a whole. Where do we focus on these research skills and how do we assess that? So I think that's me.
Thanks, Arity. Harry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Harry Joel. I'm at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. Have been involved with more the research skills development framework with the students I do research with, basically all undergraduate students, and slowly infusing that within my classes as well, the upper level classes. Mentoring about 14 students on different projects this semester. And I met Sylvia and we were in Australia at the conference almost a year and a half ago now. And then afterwards I was on sabbatical. And so just coming back into it, last semester didn't work out. I was teaching at the exact same time. So I'm looking forward and just seeing when I can join and catching up on things.
Thanks, Harry. Dustin.
So I'm Dustin Shipp. I teach physics at Utah Valley University. And yeah, so one of my pet projects is trying to reorganize, restructure the experimental physics labs, so the lab classes that the students take as part of their program. And so this research development framework really fits in really nicely with that, because so I view that class as an opportunity to teach the students how to do research, what the components are, and becoming more self-sufficient in that realm. And so I've been coming up with, using this to generate ideas and try them out on my poor students.
Thanks. Renee, how about you?
Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm Renee Helmerton, and I'm the director of the Nakatani Teaching and Learning Center. And I've had the privilege of sponsoring Sylvia and Jesse and a whole bunch of communities of practice that focus on RSD. So they are a hoot to work with and it's a blast.
Thanks, Renee. Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Clavins. I'm in the biology department at UW-Platteville. And I'm it's the same problem as Dustin had in terms of teaching at the same time last semester, so not being able to join. I came across the RSD many years ago when I was trying to write a TWOS grant for NSF for undergraduate research. And I attended a conference that you all held up at Stout several years ago on the RSD, and I was really impressed with what you had built there. I teach a course-based undergraduate research class, and so I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate the framework there, and also information literacy, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm also a coordinator with our undergraduate research mentors community, so hoping to look for some ways to incorporate what you all have here on our campus.
Thank you. Shauna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shauna from UW Parkside. I have my video off because I'm doing a work from home day. So I'm sure you can all appreciate that. I mostly do instruction as it pertains to one-shot type, support for faculty in a couple different departments. So I see students once a semester in, research assignment type situations. And I actually got involved in this community in talking to Jesse on the library side of things in our discussions about the framework for information literacy. And for me, this has been a really interesting experience because learning about the other resources and the other frameworks in looking at how we build information literacy skills, how we scaffold, that kind of thing. That's been a really interesting thing for me to be involved in this community. So I've been learning a lot. I've been lurking a little bit, but I do have some ideas for my own project moving forward. And mostly here at Parkside in Kenosha, our faculty, and as I'm sure many faculty and even librarians can identify with, our faculty are so stretched. And I really wanted to join this community to learn more about how to support our faculty in ways that I can help support or take on, any sort of research assignments that they might have, that I can, build the skills to be able to step in and help support them. So I have been learning a lot, even though I have been lurking a little bit. So thanks.
Great, thanks. So to get everybody caught up to speed, Arity, Dustin, feel free to chime in here. We spent the first semester last fall talking about the RSD framework, and we had people take a look at the RSD framework and pick an assignment or a class that they could use the framework in. And then we talked about contexts and different ways that Jesse and I use the framework. We talked about how other people might use the RSD framework. Then we were going to start projects and decided that people were at different stages. So a couple of folks have started research projects. Some are thinking about starting research projects. And I'm in the middle of doing a research project that's probably a third or fourth iteration of SOTL research. And we'll be talking about that a little bit as we move forward during the rest of the semester, because I've moved from the RSD framework to incorporating the framework for information literacy as well. So that took us up to about December, and that's when Jesse moved. And so since January, in early January, I put out what I was doing in my class. Then we took a look at how I was using it, what kinds of assessment I was using, and then what I was going to do moving forward. We talked about that. And then I also then started everybody looking at how we engage students in our classrooms. So if you have access to the website, you can go back and take a look at the modules that are posted. If you don't have access to the modules, then let me know and I'll get Jesse and I to get you access to the web page where they're posted. But starting in early January, I posted a TED Talk about reimagining classrooms, and it's a teacher talking about elementary classrooms, but she was talking about how she was thinking about teaching differently and her students' reaction to that. And then I posted an article as well about student autonomy. And one of the things that I came to recognize was that the more I expected of students, the more clarity I gave them, and the more clarity and the more direction I gave them, the less they were responsible for their own learning. So I was talking about how I took some of that away. I actually took most of that away. I scaffolded learning, but left how they would demonstrate learning up to themselves. That led to a couple weeks ago, I posted a strategy called a question formulation technique, as well as a strategy for assessing student. I used it for assessing student engagement. I tweaked Dennison and Lammy's assessing creativity assignment a bit to look at student engagement. And they use three different strands. They use creativity, technical strength, and aesthetic appeal. And I use demonstrate educational growth, demonstrate educational risk-taking, and things like that for the assessment. So that is an overview very quickly of the last semester. So Arity, Dustin, do you have anything to add?
I don't. I'm sorry that I missed some of it.
Dustin, did I capture that all right?
I think so. I mean, the thing that I took away from the first semester that that I don't see emphasized here is just the RSD framework. And I mean, at least, yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time with this, but also I think it was also very valuable to me to just, like, I like the activities where we were taking activities we were doing and trying to see how they fit into that RSD framework and how we could change those activities to address different areas.
All right, thank you. Any questions, or what questions do you have? All right, well, hearing none, the question for this week was, how can engaged learning be assessed? So for those of you who are new, this might be, a brand new topic for you. For those of you who've been following for a while, I think you knew this question was coming. So it's your turn to talk. Dustin, did you do any noodling on this?
Not a lot. I think part of the problem, when I see this question, what I'm really struggling with is, before I assess engaged learning, I have to define it. Mm-hmm. And so,
okay, so how do you know it? So how do you know if your students are engaged? Let's look at defining it.
Right. So I mean, I would say, with at least most of the activities that I do, is that either they're talking to me or talking to each other. Probably, let me put that the other way: talking to each other or talking to me, because I think it's better if they're talking to each other. If they're engaged in conversation, then I think they're probably engaged. I mean, as long as the conversation is relevant to the course, then they're engaged in learning. But yeah, there are definitely other ways that learners can be engaged. that's just the first one that comes to mind. Is the easiest to observe.
Sylvia, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
So what are we assessing, the engagement or the learning?
Well, that's a good question. Is there a difference? Can you learn without engagement?
I'm interested to hear.
Ultimately, for me, it's about learning, but I also don't think learning can occur without engagement. So I've been working on the assessment tools that I've used have been measuring engagement because I'm making the assumption that if students are engaged, then they're learning. But that's a good question. For me, engagement equals learning. That may or may not be true.
I would think that you've got a lot of students who would say that they could simply sit there and not necessarily be engaged, but that they were learning in the process. And so even though that's not the way I learned, I could imagine you would have some pushback.
Arity, how about you?
Sort of one of the informal things that I often get in my sections is students share this with me as a complaint, but they often say, I have to teach myself, or I am having to teach myself this material. Because when we're in the classroom, I'm giving them problems to solve. I'm asking them to reflect on what we've done. I'm asking them to think about how they might explain this to somebody else. So I'm doing a lot of this structuring for them to create these opportunities for metacognition and for them to interact with each other. And it's so much work for them. It's so much more work. And what they tell me is, I just want to watch you solve a problem. Right? And we all know what the research says on that, which is that they don't learn from that. It feels really good. You watch it and your brain goes, oh yeah, I know how to do that. But then when you sit down and do it, you find out that you don't. And so for me, it's kind of one of those informal assessment pieces where when my students are telling me how much they have to work, I'm viewing that as they are being actively engaged in what's going on and that they are learning. And I see that when I start asking more particular questions about what they're doing, like about a particular problem and what their process is, or asking them to share things like that, far more than if they were just watching me.
So how do you assess how do you assess your students then? How do you assess their learning, so to speak?
A bunch of different ways. So one of them is just kind of what Dustin was talking about. You go around and you just talk to them. And so the way, to give some background for everybody, the way that I teach is in an active learning format. So I have classes, right now I have sections of about 42 students. And then on our longer days, I have learning assistants that come in who are peers of the students in the classroom, but students who have successfully completed the class. And so I work with these learning assistants outside of the class, and I give them basically checkpoints, things to check in with the class about, things to ask the groups as they're going around. And I set up what I want them to do at the beginning of class, and then they just work in their groups, and myself and the learning assistants circulate and answer questions and help work through problems. We provide additional problems for people to work on if they get to that point. So there's a lot of informal assessment that happens just through that conversation piece, where we're asking them to describe their process, show how they came up with an answer. And then there's a little bit more formal assessment where maybe I'll pull a piece out of one of those problems and I'll say, okay, everybody write down your answer to this and turn it in. And then I'll grade that. And it's a really quick thing for me to grade, but it lets me know where they're at and it gives them some formal feedback. And it sort of scales up from there. So then they have homework assignments that they're completing. There are longer challenge quizzes that either are group or individual. And those can be anything from a multiple choice to a short answer to problem solving or to a conceptual explanation. And then, kind of the traditional progression up to exams and then final exams.
Thank you. So do you provide some training initially at the beginning of the semester on group dynamics so that they effectively work with one another and learn from one another?
Yeah, so we spend the first day of class doing a series of activities that superficially are unrelated to physics, but they're all about what are we doing in these small groups? Why am I making you work this way? And why is it different than like a semester-long group project where you're supposed to be finding stuff outside of class? Like, I don't expect them to do that. They're working in the classroom. So we spend probably an hour on that first day just doing stuff like that to help them figure out how they can work together. And then a lot of the language that the learning assistants and myself use when dealing with the students is talking about the benefits of explaining yourself and the benefits of asking questions and the benefits of trying something even if it's not right, and that ability to just, and that comfort to be able to take a risk and try something in the classroom. So I think, I mean, there's always more that we could do to promote that sort of group work piece, but we do provide some training with it.
That sounds fabulous, because I think that the more that they have the training, then the more engaged they are because they've built those relationships. They understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Absolutely. And we spend a little bit of time just talking about, yes, we're here to learn physics, but there's sort of all of these other ancillary skills that we need in order to be successful learners. And I try and call those out. So my objectives are often like, they're going to include the physics objectives, but they're also going to include these other like skills that we expect people to have, but we don't necessarily formally articulate them. So I try and articulate those objectives. Like today's activity, one of our objectives is to successfully communicate with your group. You know, calling that out in a way that I hope helps emphasize the benefits of that group work.
Thank you.
I think in Arity, when you were talking about, you know, having the group dynamics specifically spelled out, you know, that creates a group culture, like you said, of being able to take risks. And as someone who goes into the classroom not knowing the classroom culture, for like one day and one assignment, that can be really beneficial because usually what I do is I don't have anything to do with the assessment, unfortunately, of the engaged learning. What I do is I have the engaged learning piece. So I try to create opportunities where students can work together on their research assignment, build some scaffolding so that they can be successful on the assignment. And I notice if there is a group culture, a classroom culture of group dynamics, of, you know, an established risk-taking, because if that's not established, then the engaged learning can be really challenging. So I think that's really interesting that you said that, and I'm going to make a note of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, we talk a lot about classroom culture in our department, and particularly with our learning assistants. Like, one of my expectations for them is that they're helping to set that culture and those expectations of the standards that we want people to have for their group work and their communication. And resetting classroom culture too, because everybody knows, like, midway through a semester, things kind of get less engaged. And so being able to come back and revisit, these are our expectations about how this classroom is going to function. I mean, it's a constant thing.
How about any of the newcomers? Thoughts, ideas, anything from your experience?
I mean, just listening to some of the others, I'm running labs for my intro physical environment class. I'm a physical geographer in a geography department here. And this idea, we do a fair amount of the group work, but the idea of spending time on those group dynamics is trying to convince others in the department it's worthwhile is problematic. But the idea of engaged in learning, I think, become two separate things. In the groups, all the labs, they can work with each other and the labs are turned in. We also have individual lab exams. And so the question then becomes is, did they learn the material when they were engaged in their groups? And that can go all over the place. And so we're assessing the lab materials in that individual lab exams that we have. We have 2 in the semester. They can be very engaged in the groups, but not necessarily learning the material if you assess it through an exam mechanism.
So is it that they didn't learn it, or they need to convey what they learned in a different context than a written exam?
The lab exam is exactly like the lab themselves. So there's no difference in the questions being asked. We can change some of the numbers around and things like that, but there's no difference in the way the questions are being asked. It's basically saying, do you know how to do this and the steps to do that on your own versus within your group.
So you're looking at group accountability versus individual accountability.
Yes. In
That's
some classes I do group exams. Not in this one, but in other ones, we have an individually written exam and then they roll right into a group exam. And just to, emphasize that, often when you work to a group, the material, you come with a better result. But a lot of individuals don't want to accept that until they're forced into a group exam. But that would be a different dynamic than what we're doing in the lab exams per se.
Verity, were you going to say something?
I was just going to offer that the format that you describe, Harry, is very similar to how we used to do our physics labs before we switched to this active learning piece, where everything in the semester, like during the mechanics of the class, was all group assessments and group feedback, and then the exams were individual, and we saw exactly what you're talking about. That's very clear that certain people were carrying the group or doing a lot of the cognitive load for the group. And it wasn't that the rest of them weren't engaged,
no,
but they weren't necessarily engaged in a productive way. And so maybe this comes back to Sharon's question about, are you assessing the engagement? Are you assessing the learning? Because there are ways to be engaged with your group and what's going on, but without focusing on any of the content. And so what we've found then switching to this active learning format is that along the way, we need to have both group and individual assessments and feedback in order to get those folks who are engaged but not learning to switch into that learning component.
Yeah, we have check-ins on every lab. It's almost, we went back to a stamp mechanism where everyone needs to get the stamp.
Yeah.
And that active learning component and more inquiry-based, like here's the question, now you got to solve it, and working through together and then checking in with either lab instructors or the essays, student assistants in there. And so you're having all those components and you're trying to force that. And then the final, you could say the final assessment piece is that individual lab exam, which basically you already have the key because you've already done the labs themselves. But moving through that, I mean, I think it's improved with the way we're doing it. As the question is trying to get those students who are engaged and trying to get them to learn the material in that lab period, and then basically recalling that or understanding those as you walk into the lab exam.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really like to hear more about Verity's training. And that's something that I think I really struggle with. I have two very different courses that I'm working with this semester. One, it's one of our introductory majors courses in biology. It's not all majors because it's a service course that has other STEM students in it as well. I have 47 in that class, and this is only my second semester teaching the class. So last semester was just kind of getting the content and getting the feel for the pacing of the course. And this semester I'm trying to incorporate other things that I think are important, but also in the context of it being a multi-instructor kind of a course. So making sure that our learning outcomes are consistent across no matter who it is that's delivering the material. So there's that course that I try a lot of active learning, those sorts of things. And I have students in there who are very resistant to talking with other students, even though I try to encourage it, force it to a certain extent. So I'm not sure, we've only been together for 3 weeks. We missed a day, which kind of stuttered things for us. And then my other class, so that one meets 3 times a week. my other class is the undergraduate research experience for our majors. So the idea is we do a research project as a team over the course of the whole semester, and then teach them the fundamentals of scientific writing. I have 10, I think, in that course, but we've only met twice. We only meet once a week for 3 hours a week. And so, I can already feel that I need to do more about training with group work with them. And I don't know what to do. We only see each other for 3 hours a week. We've only met twice in 3 weeks. So I'm interested in hearing what has worked with other folks.
I will say your second class that you were describing, your research methods for your majors with 10 folks and you're only meeting once a week. Like any time that I've taught a class where I only see them once a week, it's really hard to set a culture. It's really hard to get comfortable because you just don't have that exposure piece. And it sounds, to be entirely transparent, I actually have requested to not teach classes that only meet once a week for that very reason. But some of the things that have been successful for me is I've just started blatantly talking about the research that I'm employing in a class, and talking about some of that zonal research that's out there about why this is helpful, so that it's not just me top-downing for them and saying, you're going to do this because this is what I do, but I'm always telling them why. And making those resources available. So having basically citations available on our online classroom where students can go and look up what research am I trying to employ in the class has been somewhat more successful than just expecting them to do it without any justification. Mm-hmm. And then just providing some opportunity for conversation either before or after a class and encouraging some of those pieces. And looking for things that have no or very low stakes associated with them, and using those activities as a way to promote that group engagement piece right away at the beginning, and just setting that as an expectation has been really critical for what I do.
Going back to this question of how can engaged learning be assessed, I'm wondering if I could do some kind of a mini, just looking at a trend kind of thing, trying to identify, okay, who are the students in this larger class who have not been working with others, and comparing that with those who have been more engaged in their little groups. I know that it would be anecdata, not actual real data, but it might be interesting to start to get to a link between that engagement and learning.
Yeah, and that could be something where you compare that, or maybe you share some of the existing research that's out there on that with your class and point out that this type of teaching and learning is beneficial to everybody. And then, anecdata, I missed that. That is I like that. But then you maybe pull it out of your own class too and just say, here's some trends that we're seeing. I might be a little bit hesitant, particularly with your smaller class, to do that because you might end up calling people out. But certainly sharing what the larger research is on that, I think, would be helpful.
I know that some of my ideas came from that anecdotal observation research, so that's actually, at least in my opinion, a good place to start, because then you can start to formulate refine questions, see what's going on, see what aspects of your class you want to focus on. So I did not start where I'm at now. I started where you are suggesting to start, which is just kind of observing what was going on. And that led me to my conversation with Jesse. So, and then that started this whole thing. So, anybody else want to share some thoughts?
I just want to say this is really good for me to hear. So I do a lot of that active learning stuff in my class as well. And thinking about it, I have been motivating it as much as I should be. So I kind of just throw them into it and say, hey, we're going to do group work. And some of the students get the vision and see that, yes, this is helping them learn better. Some students just say, okay, I'll just grab the problem that they're working on, and then they literally just walk out of the classroom after grabbing it. And yeah, so I think up front pointing out, like, hey, this is how studies have shown that this is how students learn best, would be really valuable to just, yeah, keep the students engaged more.
So, Dustin, what do you do for those students who walk out and don't engage with the group?
Not a lot. So my philosophy is that their grades will punish them for that. Like, those students do perform worse when the exam comes around, and I don't know, I'm considering pointing that out. So I mean, if I can actually, yeah, I wouldn't believe that unless I had some data, but maybe I can, if I can correlate attendance scores to exam scores, that might be a fun activity to point out when we take an exam this week. But yeah, it's still early enough. Sorry, I need to stop that daydreaming about things I can do with my class. But yeah, so I did make one change this semester. Last semester, when I was doing this, I was grading all of the in-class activities we did for a grade and seeing if, grading them based on their right answers. This semester, I changed to just grading it based on completion so that they had more opportunities to take risks. I call it a sandbox for, if you make all your mistakes on these in-class activities, then all your mistakes are out of the way and you won't make them on the test. And so that way it's a lot more, it's less homework and more something that they're doing to learn. Although, which sounds like homework is, if that's true, then what is homework? But, but yeah, so it's, I've trying to, I think, but like Arity's saying, dangling a carrot in front of them by saying, if you participate in this and learn how to express your ideas to others, that's going to help you learn more. I think that will, be a strong motivator as well.
And we also have some research at the university here that they went out and interviewed a bunch of employers and looked for what do people want, and group work is always one of the top things. So I just pull that up and show, okay, we're working on these skills because this is going to be of benefit to you. And then branching out from there, it's not just about your job, but about all the other things that you're doing as well. And I want to share, I actually did at one point in a couple of my classes pull attendance versus exam scores. And the trend is about like you would expect, but then there's always like a couple of folks that are really polarizing. Like they come to class all the time, but they fail, and they never come to class and they pass. And so after putting it all together for like 3 or 4 sections, it did not convey the message that I wanted, because it's not as cut and dried as you'd like it to be, and students always look at it and think they're going to be the outlier on either end.
Students are really good at assuming that they are outliers.
Yes, everybody is really good at assuming they're an outlier. We're all above average.
Right.
One of the themes that I've heard going through the conversation today is this idea of students taking risk. So one of the things I actually started to assess last semester, I found a survey, an aversion to risk survey, and I have them take it pre-class and post at the end of the semester. I haven't looked at the data because it was just last semester, and I frankly just haven't had time to look at it. But one of the things that I talk about with my students is this idea of taking a risk, whether it be a conversation. If you're quiet, then start to talk. If you don't like group work, then start to engage. And we have to have a chat about appropriate educational risk. So I think I shared in my video that I had to have a discussion with the students about midway through, which I asked them to tell me in a reflection piece. My students last semester please share the risks you've taken to date. And at mid-semester time, several of them said showing up to class. And I had to pull out the syllabus and my expectations and define for them the difference between a basic expectation and an appropriate educational risk. And coming to class did not mean they were taking a risk. I got some feedback at the end of the semester, something from a couple of students that said, yeah, that midterm reflection really got me thinking. And part of it was they weren't really doing anything, so I had them do a reflection several times in the semester, and then it was interesting to see how they were thinking, and how it speaks to what Arity just said. Everybody thinks they're above average, and it's like, yeah, no, you're not. No, you're not. If you can't come to class, you're not above average. So I don't know if any of you have any ideas about risk-taking. I also see Shauna has posted a link to an article about what employers want to see from college grads, so you should check that out. That's in the chat. But in the meantime, I'm wondering if any of you have looked at this element or this idea about taking risk in your classroom.
Dominating this conversation. This has actually been my focus. I got super curious about this about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, and I had a class and I asked on their final exam a question: what did you learn this semester? And it doesn't have to be in this class, it doesn't have to be in university, just something that you learned. And I can't remember the exact percentages, but some alarming percentage of my students wrote nothing. And I was just boggled, like, how do you go for 3.5 months and learn nothing? And I started thinking about why they would say that. And it sort of comes down to a couple of things. Like, A, they're not taking risks, and because they don't want to step outside that boundary, so they really aren't learning anything. But they're also not taking the risk of actually sharing what they learned. And for many of them, that is a risk that they view, like, that by sharing what they've learned, they're sharing a vulnerability or an interest. And so I got really curious about risk as it motivates education. And so I kind of voraciously consumed a lot of literature on this and proposed, and last fall taught a class on risk and exploration as it connects to creativity for our first year students. And that was amazing and chaotic, and just a lot of these reflection pieces like you're talking about, Sylvia, asking them to think about what constitutes risk for them. I made them go out and do interviews and find out what constituted risk for other people and do weekly reflections on things like that. And then I gave them a weekly risk, like something that they had to go out and do and document that they did it in some fashion. And it started out being a very resistant class where they just did not want to do it. And by the end of the semester, I had multiple people telling me that this was probably the most useful class they've ever taken. And just that their ability to think about how they're learning and think about how they're taking risk has been changed. So and this is kind of my piece with the RSD, is I got really interested with how do students know to ask questions, which is part of that risk assessment piece. What are you willing to risk? What questions are you willing to ask? And so that sort of motivated a lot of what I did last fall as it pertains to this group.
Yeah, I found similar results. And I think we've discussed this before in this community of practice, but the students that I had too at the beginning of the semester were really resistant. And by the end of the semester, it was like, oh, we do control our own learning. Some of them also, as we were talking, kind of broke my heart, but what do you want to get out of it? I just want to get the A and move on. And I've had several students just sort of blurt out, we've been taught our whole life not to take risks. We just follow directions and move on. So what you're asking us to do is really hard because we've never learned how to do this. And I've had them just say that, and they say it's difficult. And it is, because no one's ever given them a chance to take risk and still succeed. So.
Mm-hmm. A lot of that I want to point out is like it breaks down on gender lines, and it also breaks down on socioeconomic lines too, about where people risk and how they demonstrate their risk or their aversion to it or their ability to do it.
Oh, that's a really interesting piece. So, other thoughts from other folks?
I wanted to share something, please. So I had the opportunity to hear Michael Wesch speak. He wrote the book, The Art of Being Human, and he challenged his students. He's an anthropologist, and he challenged them to take a 30 days to learn a new habit, all kinds of new habits, to risk something, and he did it alongside them. And it's just fascinating if you ever see his work, what came out of that, how it bonded them all together, that kind of thing. So you might want to check out The Art of Being Human.
Thanks, Renee. Renee, if you have the link or any information, can you email it to me and I'll post it?
Sure.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So I'll add to that. So Michael Wesch's work was kind of one of my inspirational pieces when I was thinking about the class that I taught. And his class, his anthropology class, is entirely available online for free for anybody to go through. And I just put a link to it in the chat. It's really cool. Just the structure of it and the reflective piece of it. It's really a really neat thing about thinking about risk.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Arity. Any other thoughts from the community?
I just wanted to add, when I was thinking about my project that I worked on last semester with the RSD, I'm really interested in, as a librarian, I think we spend a lot of time with databases and scholarship, but I'm really interested in the tools that students have at their fingertips when they leave college. Some of them will have access to databases, some of them will be resourceful and get access through their employers, but the vast majority will have what's at their fingertips on their phone, things like Wikipedia, things like Google Scholar, things like other social media tools. So for me, I'm really interested in integrating some of those tools into the curriculum and really getting them familiar with the pros and cons there, getting them to use these tools in a really robust metacognitive way, so that they understand the pros and cons and can continue to gather and ask questions when they leave. But I realized when I was kind of building my potential course or my potential assignment, that asking questions was a really important goal for me, but I focused too much on the tools. And gave them a lot of scaffolding for learning the tools rather than really focusing on the question building techniques and activities, and then having the tools kind of support that. And so after I read the reading about divergent, convergent, and metacognitive, question asking, I'm kind of circling back around to the way that I put together the assignments and the learning outcomes for the course that I worked on last semester. And so I think I need to go back and really focus on some of the question asking skills that I'm asking them to build, but not assessing. So yeah, I might be back to the drawing board on that. I might take it in a different direction. But it kind of opened up a new direction for me. So I appreciated that reading.
Thanks. So something I tried, Shauna, was are you referring to the article on the QFT, the question formulation technique?
Yes, that's the one.
I tried that this semester with a middle school class, and I'm like, what I started out the semester, what questions do you have about teaching middle school? And I didn't ask the question because in the QFT you're not supposed to give them the question. I don't know the exact prompt, but it was basic. I think it was effective teaching, something like that. And I had students write down their questions and went through the process with them. It was interesting that by the time they were done, they had pretty much outlined the course as had been set up. Not exactly, but there was a really strong correlation. So now I can turn around. I took their questions, I aggregated them and then put them according to themes and then put them back online, so I can say, here's the questions you had and here's how we're addressing them. But I found that article to be, I was skeptical when I tried it, but I found that it was actually pretty helpful. So it'd be interesting to see if you use it and how you use it and how you find that it works for you.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
Other thoughts?
My thought is I'm really glad I came here today.
Yay! Well, good. I'm glad we're making it worthwhile.
I think that every single time I can get in, I can come to these meetings.
Well, good. Thank you. That's Jesse and I are happy to hear that. So it makes us smile. Thank you. All right. So one last call for any additional ideas or thoughts or questions. And if not, I'll move on. All right. So as we take a look here, you have for the next time, for the next module, an assignment, quote unquote, a to-do. And it is designed to have you connect with each other. So what Jesse and I are asking you to do is to reach out either on your own campus or within this community of practice. And we're asking the faculty to try to connect to librarians and librarians to try to connect to faculty. So if you go into the module for this week, there's more detail there. But basically, and you might need to tweak it a little bit. So I'm going to admit that I am not a librarian, so I had to kind of guess at how you would think. For the faculty, I had a pretty good idea. So the idea for, if you're a faculty, is pick one assignment that you're having trouble with. When I went to Jesse, it was the students can't do the annotated bibliography no matter how many ways I try to teach it or how much information I give them, and share that with the librarian. So Jesse said, well, look at all the skills you're asking them to unpack in that. And that's what started the discussion with Jesse and I, and have created this multi-year relationship. So, and we're trying to get those relationships started. For librarians, we're assuming you are familiar with the framework for information literacy. You might also choose the RSD framework, so whichever you want, but find a faculty member and share the framework. And this is your opportunity to request to meet with them, and then also ask them for their insights or help and how you might better connect with other faculty. The hope is that you can engage in a conversation that will allow you to have more than a one-shot kind of approach to the classroom. So feel free to tweak the assignment to best fit your individual circumstances. But what we're asking you to do is just try to find a person outside of your academic specialty, and try to get a partnership between a faculty and librarian going. So are there questions about that? The idea is to start scaffolding us up to start looking at the framework for information literacy. So I'm going to be doing the next session, and then Jesse's going to step back in tentatively. Hopefully she'll be through with her move and have her feet on the ground, because she is the expert on the framework for information literacy. So our next module is, our current module is up for 2/8/19, and our next module is going to start on 2/22, and our next meeting time is February 26th at 10:30. So are there any parting questions? Well, I guess we're done. Hearing none. I've enjoyed this hour with you, so thank you all very much for your time and sharing what you've learned, and welcome to those of you who are stepping in. So thanks. All right, have a good day, everybody.